game devs. In this video, we're going to talk about corporate structure just in general, how businesses are structured in the United States, and industry positioning in terms of how businesses are situated within the industry. How do they interact? What are the main players or stakeholders? So there are 5 main types of industry corporations. There's a sole proprietorship, a partnership, a limited liability corporation, a corporation, and an SCorp. There's also something we're going to talk about a little bit called BCorp, but it's not technically a corporation, but it's something to take a look at. So the differentiators here are that businesses are managed differently, so each one is going to be slightly different. The abilities and responsibilities of the people who are managing it, and how do they pay taxes, like if it's the individual that pays taxes or the business and the individual. And then what happens if you get sued, who is going to pay for all that, and how far does that go? And also it just determines what kind of paperwork you're going to end up doing. So a sole proprietor, this is really standard business that a lot of people will end up forming. It's as easy as hanging up a shingle. There are, for some states, a sole proprietor registration, but not every state has that. They're really easy to form. Usually it's just you fill out a fee. There doesn't need to be a business plan or anything like that. You can just kind of do this. If you've ever sold any craft goods at a Sunday market, those are all typically sole proprietors, or the next one. The sole proprietor is really great because you can have total control over the business. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. The way you would pay your taxes is if you would file one filing. You might you file it as a Schedule C, but you pay all your taxes together as if you that is the income of your business. You can also itemize your taxes. Now, right now, itemization is about $6,000 or $12,000, so it depends on how what kind of sole proprietor you are. But you can take tax write-offs. That's something you might have heard of before. Oh, write it off. It's a tax write-off. We'll talk about exactly what that means. But things that are important for your business, market research, equipment, that kind of thing, you can write off on your taxes. We'll describe what that means. So the disadvantages here is that someone can take everything that you have. They can take all of your, they can put a lien against personal goods. They can dip into, for instance, if you own a home, they may not be able to do any taking of a home. There's several protections around that, but they may be able to make you pay through a home insurance policy or something like that, if through a lawsuit. And that could be copyright infringement. That could be a patent troll coming around. There could be a lot of different things. So you're kind of at risk there. And then also when you're an employee, if you have ever worked anywhere, you can earn, you earn money and things based off of what tax bracket you're in. But that also determines how much money you pay in Social Security and Medicare. Take a look at your stipend or your paycheck, and you'll see that the company that you work for typically kicks in about half of that. So if you are going to be budgeting in that you're going to be a sole proprietor or whatever, and going indie, you should be careful that you're budgeting correctly, because you have to pay those taxes yourself. So there's actually kind of a challenge there. As far as making sure that you're making enough. You have to make a little bit more than you would be working for someone else, typically, to make the same amount. A partnership is like a sole proprietor. It's usually founded by 2 or more people. Again, it's really easy to form. Both the people, and this is the kind of double-edged sword here, is that the double-edged sword of partnerships is that it's just like a marriage. Like, you can take out credit, you can take out loans, you can make agreements, and your other partners have to go along with it. So if you all are not communicative, and if you're not able to, and if you can't decide before how things are going to work, maybe things might end up in a divorce, right? Usually you have a lot of contractual write-ups to discuss like how you're going to handle something. It's kind of like a prenup, you know. So you are also still fully liable, but you're also liable for your partner. So if your partner is, you know, for instance, just if your partner is on company business and they're driving a company car or even their own car, but to a meeting or something that they are, because, you know, they're the COO or the CEO of the company and they're going to do business, or maybe they're at a dinner in which they have something to drink, and then they end up getting into a fender bender or worse, the company could be liable, which means you could be liable for that fender bender after dinner if it was at a work event. You know, to avoid that, we have limited liability. So the term limited liability, we're going to use a bit. What it means is the company is liable for whatever things happen that the company is involved in. So if there is something like I just described, you would be able to only limit it to the company's earnings. And so if you were pulling an income from the company, you would just be able to keep all your money and nothing bad would happen. This is, for instance, how, you know, this is how a lot of companies, you see, this is how a lot of companies operate. Limited liability can be really a big asset, especially because, you know, there's so many pitfalls in business. The thing about a corporation, a C Corp is what they're called, is that they can sell stock and raise money. You can create private stock, but you can also offer IPO, initial public offering. You can go on the stock market. The disadvantages here, that limited liability comes at a cost. The cost is that business is taxed for all the income it receives, and then they pay all of the owner's salary. That salary is then taxed. So in the sole proprietorship, all the money that the company receives, you can just pay, you know, you kind of pay it all as income, and you just kind of pay it all at once. But this is kind of a double taxation because the business is kind of shielding those owners. That's kind of the point. So there are also a lot of filing fees. There are time requirements. You got to do stuff on time. There's more paperwork. There's also rules and boards that you have to form. For instance, you have to have a president. You have to have a treasurer. Valve Corporation is actually, there are like 3 positions at Valve, or at least traditionally the way their management structure has been is that there are employees and then there is a president and a treasurer. And also a corporation might mean that you might not own the company. You might just own a portion of the company. And that's different, you know? So maybe you don't want to give up the ability to make decisions for the company, if it's being run by a bunch of people. So an S Corp, it's a subchapter corporation. They're like C Corps, but they don't have to pay double taxation. But healthcare and things are taxable income. You can only be a domestic corporation, so you can't have shareholders from outside of the United States. You must have individuals, and no corporations can invest in it. So it's kind of like a limited ability to invest, and there can only be like 100 shareholders in total. So it's a really weird little corporation. You probably won't run across them very often, but they exist. Limited liability corporation, LLCs, you probably see this the most. It has pass-through taxation, which means that the business doesn't get taxed. All the people and partners get taxed as they take in income, and the owners are also shielded from the actions of the other people. There are some higher filing fees and paperwork, and also like some states will dissolve an LLC if a member leaves. Sometimes ownership can transfer from one person to another, but if you wanted to, like, say, give out shares of a corporation, people have done that as well. So there's also a B Corp. So this is not technically a corporation, but a B Corp is a business to what fair trade certification is to coffee, or USDA organic certification is to milk. So they're for-profit companies that are looking to work towards social and environmental accountability, and focus towards their own corporations. So First Playable Productions. Oops. So at one point, I'm not sure if it still is, but at one point I remember First Playable Productions was led by Toby Saulnier. She had it registered as a B Corp, and has always been about has been about working with the community, trying to engage community and the employees. See, certified B Corporation right here. So if you're interested in B Corps, this is a video game company that's all about it. Toby Saulnier is an amazing, that's her right here. She's been an amazing leader in the game industry and it has really contributed a lot to that kind of work. So, we've got this just handy dandy chart. We've got limited exposure here, so limited liability, state registration stuff. LLCs are unlimited unless they're being taxed as an S Corp, and then they're 100, so it depends. S Corps, you need to be a U.S. citizen to own or invest in, but C Corps and LLCs can be invested by other businesses. So like, how there's that like big chart of car companies, and all the car companies kind of own each other. That's how that works. We're going to talk about that in a little bit in an example case study. Corporations can issue shares. Pass-through taxation is not for C Corps and S Corps. And required to meet annual reports and minutes. So let's check out how taxes work. Okay, so we're gonna talk about like federal taxable income, and this is kind of made up. It's just as an example. But I may have you answer this in class as well. So what we have here is a set of tax brackets. Brackets mean how much money you pay for the amount of money you earn. So if you earn any of the dollars between 0 and 10,000, you don't pay any taxes on it. If you earn 10 to 20, you pay 10% taxes on the money you earn from 10 to 20. So if you earn $10,001, you pay 10 cents in taxes. Okay, so brackets don't like automatically retroactively tax you. It's just the next bracket up, which I think is pretty fair. The way it's kind of tiered in terms of a little bit of change going up. And it doesn't stop you from earning your full potential, comparatively to someone else who is earning that much, otherwise. So if you earn $20,000 a year, the total taxes are $1,000. So the $20,000 to $40,000, you pay 15% taxes on this. So if you earn $40K, $4,000 are taxes. Why is that? Because 20,000, right? So if we have 20,000 here, 20,000 times 0.15, that's 3,000 here. And then we also already are paying $1,000 of taxes for this bracket as well. So the total would be 4,000. Does that make it? Hopefully that makes sense. So 40,000 and up, you pay 20,000. All right, so here's a question. Calculate the amount of money that you would take if you earned $36,500. All right, $36,500. So if you take that, which one of these options is the correct one? Okay, now that you've tried that, try 49,000. Okay, try 49,000. Which one of these options is the correct option for $49,000 worth of money using these tax brackets? All right. So now that we're talking about brackets, what about write-offs? All right. So what's the thing called a tax write-off? Write-offs allow you to spend more money on stuff before you get taxed. If Akane earns $21,000 a year, she buys $1,000 item that she can write off. She can deduct $1,000 of her gross income. And when Akane reports her taxes, she's going to say that she made $20,000 and pay taxes on the $20,000 instead of the $21,000. But if Akane didn't make that purchase, she would report she made $21,000. So if she did that, she would pay $150 worth of taxes, right? So she would pay $150 worth of taxes on that $1,000. So, if she didn't take it, she would only take home about $8,500 worth of the dollars that she could pay. So she got more bang for her buck, basically. She got $150 free dollars. So if that's the case, let's give an example. If Akane, we already have 49,000, right? So if Akane decided to make $7,000 worth of purchases, so it's down to 42,000, right? So if they made $7,000 worth of purchases that were write-offable, what would be the amount of money that they're saving? What's the free dollars on that between those two numbers? All right, so between 49 and 42, which one of these is it? Not only are there, regular corporations, there's also kind of these main stakeholders. This may be different or the same company. It kind of depends. So we're going to just talk about them as stakeholders. Some people, so the stakeholders here are developers who create the games, publishers who finance the games, the hardware manufacturer approves games that are allowed to be on their hardware, and then the franchise or the IP intellectual property holder is someone who owns like the story or the character, that kind of thing. So if this was one of the games I worked on, the developer would be Kryptonite Games, the publisher would be Sega, the hardware manufacturer would be Nintendo, and the intellectual property franchise holder would be Marvel. And so this is how we have the industry set up. Most companies will either do one or two of these things. There are a few places where you get almost all of that together, like Nintendo does a lot of this all together. They develop, publish hardware and IP, but not all wings of their business do that. They also work with other things. So you've probably heard of parties, right? First party, third party. These are the definitions. Second party is kind of colloquially used. I'm setting a definition here that I've seen from the internet, and we've used in the industry, but also there's disagreement there. But first party means game hardware companies like Microsoft. Sometimes first party developers are the Pokemon company or like Bungie Studios. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Second party is like independent companies that work with, basically exclusively on one platform. So Sucker Punch, they were bought by Sony, but before that they worked on tons of Sony products for a while. So this is kind of where that term applies. It's rare, and it doesn't really mean too much. But some people also say companies that are invested as a minority share from the first party companies also kind of fall into this as well. So we'll see that in a bit. And then third-party games, third-party people, publishers or developers are publishers as Activision and their subsidiaries. So Vicarious Visions is a game developer that works for Activision. They're third-party developers. And then there's people who aren't affiliated. Those are indies, all right? So let's take a case, Bungie Studios. This is a really crazy case, I think. Bungie was founded in 1991, way long ago. And Microsoft and Bungie used to work on a game. They made a game called Marathon. There's one of my probably favorite games. The first game I played online, I think, was Myth: The Fallen Lords. So they worked on a lot of different things. They also worked on Mac products, and they started designing Halo at one point. And Halo was originally designed as a Mac-only top-down shooter. I think it was probably more like what Halo Wars ended up being. But obviously that took a really weird turn when Microsoft bought Bungie in 2000, making them an indie studio, taking them from an indie studio to a first-party studio, because Microsoft wanted to release the Xbox back then. And Halo ended up being the Xbox exclusive, no longer Mac as it was. So Microsoft bought Bungie. Later on, though, Bungie ended up splitting back off. They ended up buying back a lot of their stock and splitting off it, and they became Bungie LLC. Microsoft owns a minority interest in this, by the way, which is why they're kind of like a second party group. So they're being backed by Microsoft. Microsoft still wants them. And also, by the way, Halo is now owned by Microsoft in 2007. Bungie no longer has that IP. They have to invest in Destiny. In 2010, Bungie makes Destiny for Activision, and it's like a 10-year deal. So at this point, I kind of call them third-party developers. They're exclusive with Activision they're going to be tight with them for a while. And then that happened in 2010. Now, just recently in 2019, Bungie split off from Activision. That 10-year deal is gone. And they're self-publishing Destiny now, which they're a third-party company. They also took $100 million investment from NetEase, which is a Chinese software company. Yeah, you've probably heard of them. So this is something that's kind of happening. So they're being invested by other companies as well. Bungie kind of spans the gambit. Not a lot of companies have this amount of action going on, but there's other cases as well. So one of the best ways we can learn about companies is if we go to their investor relations. So the way stock works, I mentioned stock a couple times. Stocks are shares in a company, and it's like a piece of paper, typically, and it represents a percentage of ownership over a company. Numbers of stocks vary depending on what company and a lot of different factors, but all companies that are owned by a group of people, there's percentages that are being owned by those people. If it's a publicly traded company, this is like the stock market. People can go buy stocks without as they wish, and then they own the stock. Now, what happens is the stock is owned at a value. So they buy it, let's say, at $10. And then over time, over time, the company becomes more valuable and the stock rises. A lot more people want to buy it, but there's still the same amount of stock. And then the value rises to, say, $20. What that means for you is not really too much. It means that your net worth, which is the amount of money that you own that's tied up in stocks, has gone up. And that's really good if you want to sell later on, that kind of thing. The other thing a stock can do, not all companies do this, but many do, is they pay a dividend. So some stock is actually gives dividends, which will provide money to you, like $1 per share or $0.25 per share once every 3 months. This is typical when companies are doing well. They want to pay people pay people who own their stock to make the stock more valuable, which makes it go up, which again makes it more valuable. So that's kind of how that works. You can check out Wall Street, the NASDAQ. Playing stocks is really fun. Just tracking it. There's a lot of apps and stuff out there too. But when you're in a publicly traded company, so the NASDAQ here for Activision is $58 a share, is how much it costs right now. That means that you would have to, for every share, you'd spend $58. But all publicly traded companies have investor relations pages, and in those pages are annual reports. And annual reports are a fantastic way to get to know a company. This is the how much money they made. They're required by law to write this up, and there's a lot of information here that's kind of preamble and like what their goals are, that kind of thing, and that's really important. But the real juicy parts here are all the business parts that are required by law. So they talk about reportable segments. They break down their business into King, Blizzard. They break it down into Activision Publishing. So they break it down into different categories of their business. You can kind of see which parts they have manufacturing. They talk about their competition, because all of this they need to explain to their potential investors and the investors they already have, which is the general public. They need to explain to them why their company is valuable and how they're going to tackle different problems in the industry going forward. So all of this is basically not a playbook, but kind of a last year's briefing on how much money they made. So see this cash dividend. So we paid a dividend annually since 2010. In 2019, they per share spent 37 cents on dividends, and these dividends have been rising year to date. So, it's important to note this. They often will compare, but they can show you how much money the last 5 years, and these are in millions. So the Activision Blizzard made, and they've made quite a bit. Isn't that pretty? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a profit, right? So there's profit, and then and they did make profit, but that's just how much they made total. So it's really fascinating to go through all of this. There's a lot of information that you can break down, and there's a lot of different companies that are out there that you can take a look in. So if you're interested in the more of the how the business works and that kind of thing, take a look at these annual reports. This is how the big companies do it, and these can be a really great foundation for you figuring out where you want to target. If a publisher you're working with, maybe you want to see what they're targeting. You want to see what kind of values they have. In Activision Blizzard, there's the corporate governance. We've got bylaws, all those kind of information. But we've also got Activision mission statement. And this is actually Blizzard's mission statement, because Activision kind of has a different one. But mission statements are also really valuable for understanding and creating a company structure and understanding what your goals as a company are. For Blizzard, this is dedicated to creating the most epic entertainment experiences ever, right? So entertainment, already that means not necessarily video games, but also movies and stuff too, right? That's maybe a change from their original, but maybe not. Oftentimes these mission statements are really valuable at understanding what kind of company, what kind of things you can bring to the table that would appeal to these companies. So gameplay first, commit to quality. Blizzard games have always been super high quality, play fair. StarCraft is super balanced. Embrace your inner geek. They've definitely had fan events. Every voice matters. Think globally. They have a lot of business in China and other places. Lead responsibly, learn and grow. So these are kind of their corporate structure, and all companies need to have a mission statement. It really kind of sets the tone, and it can feel a little wishy-washy for some people, but it's really important and valuable for a business person to write their own mission statement for their company to be able to identify that. So the other thing I wanted to go over was the type of indies there are, or kind of developers out there. So, I worked for Group to Night Games. That was a business to business, typically corporation. So was Vicarious Visions before they got bought by Activision. What that means is that they did business with other corporations that wanted a game done, and they would pitch, or they would ask their contacts, all right, which games do you have on the docket? What movies do you have coming up that you need developers for? What don't you have the ability to develop in-house on your own? So there are always going to be a lot of companies out there that typically these companies live on pretty razor thin margins. So for a lot of companies out there, what in the business to business, what they'll do is they'll say, all right, we're going to do this game. We estimate based off of the level design documents and based off the level design documents and based off of the early on discussions about features and characters and levels and all that kind of stuff. They're going to decide, all right, this is going to cost about $800,000 to make. And since that's $800,000, we're going to charge 20% as a kind of a profit, a built-in profit for doing business. And maybe it's 20%, maybe it's zero because the company really wants more business from the specific IP holder or something. Maybe it depends. And it depends also on whether or not you get a revenue stream from if you get any kickback for getting over 1 million sales or 1,000 sales or whatever it is. Contracts usually gets there are a lot of different kind of contracts in the B2B, but that's how you do it. There's also indie IP with publisher. So usually if you have an IP, if you're like, oh, I have this great idea, publisher, you give me money and I will make this idea. The publisher's probably going to want ownership over that IP, or what they call first rights of refusal. You could lose rights depending on how your contract is set up, or maybe there's rights of refusal. Maybe they don't own it, but they are able to stop you from making a second one within a time. There's a lot of different aspects of this, and it's too much to go into. But if you're shopping around your idea to other publishers, they're going to want a piece of the action, probably an ownership. So even if it's a minority stake. Then there's also indie IP, like direct to customer. So this is obviously where a lot of indies are going, where they're selling directly on the App Store or on Steam or directly on their website. And the only thing that Steam is taking is like 30% cut or whatever it is that they're taking now. So, that is sometimes really wonderful because that means the developer owns the intellectual property. They can do, again, it's like sole proprietors versus getting other people's money. If you want to own it all, you get all the power, but you also take all the risk. And you also probably have the least amount of marketing. Your product really has to shine. It has to look beautiful. Or it has to play really well, or it has to be marketed really well. It can be really difficult to do that because you're competing against Activision, who is also figuring out how to do that. So your mileage may vary. There's also B2B. So out of the type of indies, there's B2B, which creates games for a cash fee. Typically, this is like, let's say that they discuss, all right, we're going to do a side-scrolling platformer. It's going to have 6 levels, et cetera, 5 characters. They spec out probably how much it's going to cost. Let's say it's like $800,000. The company is going to then bid like $1 million, and they're going to build in a little profit margin for themselves. And they're competing against other companies as well. And so they'll build in that little profit margin and try to make some money off of it. They may also, depending on the game, maybe they might make no profit because they're looking to get revenue after there's a lot of sales, because maybe the IP is really hot and you're just really the company's got real confidence that's going to happen. So there's a lot of different kind of contracts for B2B. Business to business, but it's basically cash on fee. They don't own the IP. They're just a really good dev studio. It's, hey, we make software, we make side scrollers, we'll make a side scroller with your skin on it. or we'll make games with your theme around it because we're a creative company who's good about making products for a brand. So there are a lot of different kinds of companies out there. Other than that, that's about all I wanted to go over today. I will see you in class.